The flag flapped against a restless Colorado wind, its edges frayed, its rhythm steady like a fading heartbeat. The Memorial Park in Colorado Springs was quiet, unnaturally so, as rows of people stood shoulder to shoulder, hats in hand, watching the honor guard lower the folded flag onto a wooden stand. Ray Donovan stood near the back of the crowd, hands jammed into the pockets of his faded jacket, gaze distant. His buzz cut had grown out some since his last tour, now peppered with silver that didn't belong to a man just turning 38. He didn't like these ceremonies. Too clean, too staged, too far removed from the sand, the blood, the noise. He was about to leave, just shift his weight, turn quietly, slip out behind the line of trees. When it happened, the dog came limping through the crowd. People moved instinctively, parting like ripples in water. It wasn't the dog's appearance that drew gasps. It was something else, something in the way it moved, like it had been tracking something, someone with purpose. Its coat was patchy, black and tan fur matted with dirt. A long scar ran down its left flank. Its ribs showed through thin skin. But its eyes, God, those eyes, they weren't lost, they were locked, on him. Ray felt it like a punch to the chest. The dog didn't veer, didn't sniff around, didn't bark or whimper, just came straight at him, stumbling, dragging one hind leg, but not stopping, until it was less than 3 feet away. Then it collapsed. Flat out, chest heaving, eyes still locked on his. "What the hell?" Ray murmured, stepping forward on instinct. A man in a dress uniform shouted for medics. Someone gasped. An older woman clutched her purse tighter. And yet Ray didn't hear any of them. He was looking at the dog. Closer now. The fur around its neck was singed. The pads of its paws were cracked. But even in its brokenness, the dog didn't look afraid. It looked relieved. He crouched slowly, ignoring the whispering crowd. His hands hovered just inches from the dog's body. Up close, the smell hit him. Burnt hair, blood, diesel. His chest tightened. "Easy," Ray whispered. "You're okay now." The dog blinked once, slow and deliberate. Then its eyes drifted closed, breath ragged. "Sir, please step back," said a paramedic kneeling beside him. The man's latex gloves were already out, his partner opening an emergency kit. "This animal needs immediate attention." Ray didn't move. Not until the dog was lifted gently onto a stretcher and secured inside the rescue van. Then he stood, still staring, not quite able to walk away. "Do you know it?" the woman beside him asked. Ray didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know if he was going crazy. But he knew those eyes. He knew that weight in his chest. That gravity, like something long buried, had suddenly broken the surface. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the last notes of the bugle faded into the wind, Ray found himself still standing at the edge of the park, looking toward the distant blur of the van's tail lights. It should have ended there. But an hour later, as he walked through the parking lot to his truck, something stopped him cold. A streak of dried blood on the passenger door, and a single paw print, not messy, not random, deliberate. He stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. The van had never passed this way. That dog had found him, and it had come through fire to do it. The emergency clinic on Garden Valley Road was quiet, except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the distant drip of IV fluid. Ray stood in the corner of the intake room, hands clenched into fists, watching through the observation window. The dog lay motionless on the table, surrounded by a vet tech and a tired-looking woman in scrubs who moved with the calm urgency of someone used to crisis. German Shepherd mix, severe dehydration, multiple burn scars, bruised ribs, dislocated hip. No collar, no tags. The vet muttered, her gloved hands moving swiftly. "Let's get some fluids in, full blood panel, and X-ray that hip." The tech nodded, adjusting the IV line. Ray should have left 10 minutes ago. Maybe more. He hadn't even meant to follow the rescue van. But the moment he got in his truck, something just shifted. Like gravity had rearranged itself, and the only direction was forward. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find. "Sir." Ray blinked. The vet was standing at the door now, her expression guarded but not unfriendly. "I'm Dr. Monroe. You said you saw the dog collapse in the park." He nodded. It came straight at me, like it recognized me. Her brow rose slightly. "Do you?" "No." Ray said too quickly, then added, "Maybe. I don't know." Dr. Monroe studied him for a moment. "We didn't find a microchip, or at least not an active one. There's evidence of surgical scarring near the shoulder, maybe where a chip used to be. It could have been removed or damaged. This dog's seen some serious trauma." Ray looked past her to the window. The dog hadn't moved. "I'm guessing military," she added quietly. Ray's eyes narrowed. "You're guessing that about me or the dog?" "Both." He exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I served. Afghanistan. Rescue Division. K9 handler." She gave a faint nod. "That tracks." The silence stretched between them. "We'll stabilize him tonight," she said finally. "After that, he'll go to county shelter unless someone steps in. If he's not chipped or claimed, protocol kicks in." Ray flinched. The words felt surgical. Cold. "How long does he have?" 3 days, maybe 4. He looked down at his boots. "I'm not in a position to take in a dog." "You're not in a position," she echoed. "Or you're just scared of what happens if you let yourself care again." Ray's jaw tightened. "That's none of your business." She didn't argue, just gave a tired shrug and walked back into the treatment room. He stayed another hour, unmoving, watching, waiting. And then, just before he turned to leave, the dog's head lifted, eyes half open, breathing shallow. It looked at him, not around, not at the room, not at the IVs or the shadows in the corner. At him. And for one strange, electric moment, Ray's chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. Not since the day he knelt over a bleeding dog in a burning building in Kunduz, whispering over and over, "Hold on, buddy, I've got you." He blinked the memory away. This wasn't the same dog, couldn't be, but the way it tilted its head, the faint tremor in its ear, the way its eyes didn't beg, but understood. Ray gripped the edge of the doorframe. His throat burned. Outside, the night had deepened. Snow was starting to fall again. He stepped outside, leaving behind the warmth and the hum and the dog that shouldn't have known his name. He got into his truck. The passenger seat was empty. But for the briefest second, he thought he smelled smoke and sand. He drove home in silence, windows up, knuckles white on the steering wheel. At the red light outside his apartment complex, something flashed in his periphery, a smear on the window. He leaned closer. Another paw print, this one fresher, smaller. He didn't sleep that night, didn't even try. Somewhere, buried beneath layers of denial and dust and years of trying not to feel, something was clawing its way back up. And it had 4 legs, a scar down its side, and eyes that knew too much. Ray didn't remember pulling into the clinic parking lot again. He wasn't even sure what excuse he'd used at work. Something about a plumbing emergency. Not that anyone questioned him. He was the kind of guy people gave space to without asking why. It was barely 9 a.m. when he walked through the door. "He's still in the recovery room," Dr. Monroe said, barely looking up from her clipboard. "Stable. Quiet night." Ray hesitated. He eat anything? Refused food. Sniffed it. Backed away. Hydration? Better, but not good. His systems are still in defense mode. Ray nodded, staring through the glass again. The dog lay curled against the far corner of the crate, eyes open now, fixed on the door as if he'd been expecting him. Ray pushed the door open. The moment he stepped in, the dog didn't growl, didn't whimper, just tensed. Every muscle coiled tight, ears lifted, eyes wide, hyper-focused. And then, slowly, it stood. It was a painful effort, hind leg dragging slightly, ribs shuddering under its weight. But it stood. It faced him. And then, something Ray hadn't expected. The dog let out a single chuff of breath and stepped forward. It didn't go to the food bowl. It didn't circle or sniff like most strays. It walked in a straight line, slow and deliberate, until it was inches from Ray. Then it sat. That's when Ray's breath caught. Not from the closeness, but from the sound. The dog let out a faint, almost imperceptible whine, deep in its chest, broken at the edges, and tilted its head, just slightly to the left. That tilt. Ray's knees went weak, because that was exactly what Max used to do. Years ago. Same move, same hesitation. Right before he lunged into rubble during a search. Right before he stepped between Ray and a wired pressure plate in a blown-out shack in Wardak. Jesus, Ray whispered, dropping to one knee. The dog leaned in, its forehead pressing gently to his. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Doc, he called, voice hoarse. I need to ask something crazy. She stepped in, arms crossed. I'm listening. You said no chip, but scarring where one might have been. That mean it was surgically removed? Could be. Or damaged in trauma. Ray looked back at the dog, then up at her. Could someone, deliberately, try to erase a dog's identity? Monroe blinked. It's happened before, especially with war dogs. Black market adoptions, illegal trades. Some people want them for all the wrong reasons. Ray nodded slowly, the puzzle forming. I need to know if there's anything else. Any marker, implant, surgical tag, anything that might have survived. She hesitated, then exhaled. We can run a scan, but we already did a surface check. We'd need to go deeper. Do it. Ray said, I'll cover the cost. Ray, I need to know. That afternoon, they sedated the dog and ran a full-body scan. And there it was, a fragment of metal embedded near the upper abdomen, too small for a chip. Almost missed on the first scan, but its shape wasn't random. A tiny rectangle, beveled edge, like a flattened coin. Ray stared at the screen, heart hammering. Can you get it out? It's risky, Monroe said, but doable. Do it. She nodded to the tech. Pre-op now. Ray sat outside the OR, leg bouncing, hands clasped. He hadn't felt this kind of dread since the last extraction op overseas, when time worked against bone and fire and fate. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. When Monroe finally emerged, she was holding a sterile tray. On it lay a thin, corroded metal tag, barely the size of a quarter, faint letters still visible under the burnt edge. MWD Max 11,372 A USAF Ray's world tilted. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Max, he whispered. Not a ghost, not a dream, not just a dog that looked like him. It was him, alive, scarred, broken, burned, but alive. Monroe said something, but her words were distant. The walls, the lights, the room, all of it blurred. Only one thing was clear. The dog in that room had crawled through fire to find him, and now it was Ray's turn to come back for him. Ray sat on the bench outside the recovery room, elbows on knees, staring at the floor like it owed him answers. The metal tag sat in his palm, warm from his grip, the letters etched deep into the skin of his memory now. MWD Max 11,372 AUSIF. It didn't feel real. Not just because Max was alive, but because it forced open a door Ray had spent years nailing shut. That day in Kunduz, the explosion, the screaming, the smoke, the blood. And Max, limp in his arms, unmoving. Ray had carried his body through twisted metal, through a field of fire, only to be told days later that Max didn't make it through triage. But here he was, breathing, scarred, looking at Ray like he never left. Dr. Monroe leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "So, what are you going to do?" Ray didn't look up. "I don't know. He's yours." "I haven't earned that anymore." She walked in, sat beside him. "You think he came all this way to judge you?" Ray didn't respond. She waited a moment, then got up. "He'll recover faster in a home. You're on the paperwork now. Either take him today or we start the county process tomorrow." That word again. County. Ray swallowed hard. "I need time." "You have until tomorrow morning." He nodded, barely. She walked off, leaving Ray alone with a truth that sat heavier than anything he'd carried in uniform. That night, he didn't sleep. Max's crate was still in the back of the clinic. The lights were dimmed. The building locked. But Ray knew, without needing to check, that Max wasn't sleeping either. Something about the weight in his chest told him their breathing was still synced, like it had been in the barracks, in the Black Hawk, under the stars in some god-forsaken part of the world. By dawn, Ray was back at the clinic. The receptionist hadn't even had her coffee yet when she saw him through the glass. "You're early," she mumbled, unlocking the front door. "I'm here for him." Dr. Monroe met him at the back, paperwork in hand, expression unreadable. "You sure?" Ray didn't answer, just took the leash. Max limped out of the recovery room, slower than before, but steadier. His ears perked at the sight of Ray, tail giving a faint twitch. Ray knelt again. Max didn't hesitate this time, pressed his muzzle into Ray's chest. "I got you," Ray whispered. "You got me. I get it." By the time they walked out of the clinic, Max was leaning against his hip like old times, the way they used to move as one. Back at Ray's small apartment, it wasn't glamorous, just a basement unit with mismatched furniture and walls that carried every footstep from above. But it was warm, and it was quiet. Max walked the space like he remembered it, stopping at the edge of the couch, sniffing the corners. Then, without warning, he went straight to the hall closet and sat. Ray frowned. "What is it?" Max let out a short, low whine. Ray opened the door. There, pushed behind a duffel bag and a box of discharge papers, was an old, folded wool blanket. Army green. Threadbare. Ray pulled it out. Max circled once, then lay down on it like he was finally home. Ray stared for a long moment before, sitting beside him, knees drawn up, hands in his lap. And then, for the first time in years, he cried. Not loud, not messy, just tears that came from a part of him he thought was long gone. But it didn't last long, because the knock on the door came quick. Too quick. Not a neighbor, not the mailman. Ray opened it to find a man in a black jacket, sunglasses too dark for the overcast sky. "Ray Donovan?" the man asked. "Who's asking?" The man flipped a badge. "Homeland Security. We need to talk. About the dog." Ray's jaw clenched. Behind him, Max stood. And growled. Ray didn't invite the man in. He didn't have to. The moment Max growled, everything about the room changed. The air tightened. The old scars on Ray's back seemed to itch like they knew something was off. The agent kept his hands visible, but his posture was rigid, trained. "My name's Agent Salter. I'm not here to cause trouble." "Funny," Ray said, not stepping aside. "That's usually what people say before they do exactly that." Salter nodded toward Max. "That dog, he shouldn't be alive." Ray's jaw twitched. "Yeah, well, newsflash, he is." Salter's gaze didn't move. "You know what happened in Kunduz?" Ray didn't answer. "I read your file. You went in after your unit got ambushed. pulled 3 men out alive, and a dog. You dragged that animal through a half-mile of wreckage, lost half your hearing in the blast." Ray's hand clenched around the doorframe. "Why are you here?" "Because 4 days ago, that dog tripped an old security flag when it passed through an outdated surveillance net near Fort Carson. The system pinged a decommissioned MWD-ID. That tag was supposed to have been destroyed." Ray glanced back. Max was still by the closet, one paw forward, ears alert. "What do you want?" Ray asked. "Answers?" Salter said. Because the last time that dog was seen on record, he was in a classified base zone, and according to every file, he died in a facility fire. Ray stared at him. Max didn't die. He was left. Salter didn't deny it, just looked past Ray, at Max. "There's a name. Keller. Ring a bell?" Ray's face darkened. "Yeah, he ran our field division, called the shot to abandon the search after the explosion." Salter's eyes didn't blink. "That same Keller now runs a private security consulting firm, a big one, government contracts, access to experimental K-9 training programs." Ray felt it all click, too fast and too sharp. "You're saying he had something to do with this?" "I'm saying," Salter replied. "We've had suspicions for years, disappearing dogs, misused assets, black ops with no oversight. And your dog showing up now, looking like he clawed his way out of hell, just reopened every buried file we've got." Max stepped forward. Just one step. But it was enough. His eyes locked on Salter like he remembered something. Something not good. Salter lowered his voice. "That reaction? That's not nothing." Ray looked down at Max. "What do you want from us?" "Help," Salter said. "Your dog remembers things no camera ever caught, places no agent ever came back from. We need to know where he's been, what he's seen. Who did this to him?" Ray's mouth was dry. "He's not evidence?" "No," Salter said. "He's the only witness." They stood in silence. Max sat, still watching Salter like he could smell old lies under new cologne. Ray exhaled. "We do it on my terms." Salter gave a nod. "You're the only one he trusts. I don't want him anywhere near a lab or an interrogation room. Just observation, guidance." Ray rubbed his face. "Jesus. You said it yourself. He was left." Ray looked at Max again. The dog didn't blink, just waited. "I'm not leaving him," Ray said finally. "You won't have to." Salter left them with a packet of files, a burner phone, and a date. 1 week. Ray closed the door behind him. He leaned against it for a long time, heart pounding like war drums. Max padded over, sat beside him. Ray looked down. "You remember something, don't you?" Max didn't move. But when Ray reached out, Max rested his head in his palm. And that was answer enough. The first few days felt like relearning how to breathe. Ray took Max everywhere he could, within reason. The dog didn't do crowds anymore, and loud sounds still made him flinch. But open spaces, quiet back roads, long walks before sunrise, Max could handle those, needed them. Ray did too. Each day Max pushed a little farther, climbed steps he'd hesitated at, trotted instead of limped, sat longer with his eyes closed when Ray hummed an old tune from deployment. But what caught Ray off guard wasn't just Max healing. It was how the dog started working again, without cue, without command. One morning they were walking behind the elementary school Ray worked at part-time. The lot was empty except for his truck, a few stray birds, and a busted vending machine by the gym wall. Max stopped. Not slowed. Stopped, like he'd hit a tripwire only he could sense. His head lowered, ears up, nose twitching. He began to scan the area with short, deliberate steps. Ray froze, instincts flaring. "What is it, buddy?" Max moved to the side of the dumpster, circled twice, then sat, eyes locked on a backpack wedged behind it. Ray approached carefully. The bag looked ordinary. Canvas, navy blue. But something about the way Max guarded it told Ray it wasn't lunch or school books. He opened it slowly. Inside, wires, duct tape, a small radio trigger, homemade, crude, but functional. Ray stepped back, adrenaline slamming into him. Max stood, moving between Ray and the pack like a wall of fur and purpose. Ray called it in. Within minutes, local PD and a bomb squad swarmed the area. The school locked down preemptively, though no students had arrived yet. Ray answered every question, but none of them made sense. No threats had been issued, no suspects spotted, nothing on the cameras, just one dog with a memory that smelled what machines didn't catch. Later that night, Agent Salter called. "You sure he hasn't had recent training?" Ray's voice was low. He did what he always did. He worked the moment he smelled trouble. Salter paused. "Then he's more than a memory. He's an asset." "No." Ray snapped. "He's not yours. He's not an asset. He's Max." Salter didn't argue. "Fine. But assets don't walk into elementary schools and find active devices by accident." Ray rubbed his temple. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone may be watching to see if Max is really dead. And if he isn't, they might want to finish the job." Ray hung up without answering. The next morning, Max was up before Ray, sitting at the window, watching. Ray poured coffee and stood beside him. "You sense something?" Max didn't move, but his eyes tracked the same silver SUV that had circled the block twice in the last hour. Ray's hand drifted to the bat behind the door. By noon, he had installed cameras. By nightfall, the SUV hadn't come back. The next day, Ray and Max went to the field on the edge of town, the same stretch of open land they used to train on years ago. Ray tossed an old Kong dummy across the grass. Max watched it fly, didn't chase it. Instead, he moved off course, nose down, toward a patch of earth that had been disturbed recently. He sat. Ray approached. Buried 6 inches down, a GoPro, cracked lens, dead battery. Ray didn't say a word, just looked at Max. "Someone's watching." Max didn't bark. He didn't need to. He just stood tall, scarred and silent, like a soldier reporting for duty long after the war was supposed to be over. And Ray finally understood. This wasn't just healing. It was surveillance, triggers, messages left in dirt and silence. Whoever had left Max behind hadn't expected him to come back. Now they were checking, and Max wasn't done telling his story. They waited until the wind died down. That's how Ray knew it was real, because Max only moved when the world went still. That night, it was still. Salter met them on the edge of Red Hill, just outside a chain-link fence with warning signs half buried in snow. Decommissioned utility station, or at least that's what it used to be. Now it was marked private security property. "Max has been circling this place for 2 days," Ray said quietly. "Keeps stopping by the east fence line, like he's remembering something." Salter nodded. "We checked the old maps. There used to be a small command trailer there, back when Keller's outfit leased this land from the DOD. Not on the public lease records, but it's in the buried logs." "You think Max was brought here?" "I think this was where he was rewritten." Ray flinched. The phrase felt like a gut punch. "Don't say that." Salter didn't argue, just tapped his earpiece. "We have backup staged a mile out, but you two are leading. Max knows something we don't." Ray glanced down. Max was already locked in, his breathing even, posture alert. He moved with no hesitation toward the fence, nose to the dirt. They followed. The wind picked up again, sharp and metallic as they passed the gate. No lights, no alarm. Like whoever used to guard it had either stopped caring or wanted someone to walk in. The first sign of life came 20 yards in, a fresh footprint. too fresh. Ray crouched. Boot tread. Military pattern. Recently cleaned soles. The kind only worn when you don't expect to leave tracks, but forget the wind's direction. Max growled. It wasn't loud, but it was low and final, his ears angled left toward an old shack half buried under camo netting and brush. Salter whispered, 2 heat signatures. 1 stationary, 1 moving. Max didn't wait. He surged forward, not running, but with purpose, until he reached the door. He sat, looked at Ray. Permission. Ray nodded once. Max lunged with his front paw, hitting the latch hard enough to rattle the wood. Inside, the rusted door creaked open under its own weight. Ray stepped in first, flashlight cutting across dust and mold. In the far corner sat a figure in civilian clothes, hands up. Middle-aged, bald, scar down his neck. "Name's Blake," he said before anyone asked. "I'm not armed." Salter kept his weapon low but ready. "Who are you with?" Blake didn't answer, just looked down at Max. "That's him, isn't it?" he said quietly. "The one from Kunduz?" Ray's voice dropped. "What did you do to him?" Blake licked his lips. "It wasn't just me. Keller had a program, a side contract, unofficial. After the fire, they brought him in, said he was brain dead. But he wasn't. They ran tests, behavioral wipes, conditioning, trying to turn him into a ghost tracker. No handler, no bond, just orders." Max growled again. This time, the sound rumbled the floor. He kept resisting. Blake added, "Wouldn't take the commands, not fully. He knew something wasn't right. Keller gave up on him, left him in the desert compound, drugged, forgotten. But someone let him go. Someone with a heart." Ray felt rage bloom behind his ribs. "Why are you telling us this now?" Blake exhaled. "Because I'm tired, and because your dog found me, which means Keller will find me next." Salter stepped forward. "Give us something. Anything." Blake reached into his jacket, slowly, and pulled out a small flash drive. "All the logs, everything Keller buried, Project Valkyrie, every name, every dog." Ray took the drive, heart pounding. Behind them, Max moved toward Blake. Not to attack, to stare, face to face. Blake met the gaze. His throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't fight hard enough." Max stood still for a long moment, then turned. Away. Judgment delivered. Ray looked at Salter. "We need to go, now." Salter nodded, calling in the team. As they walked into the freezing dark, Ray glanced back once. The shack behind them sat quiet again. But Max didn't look back. He didn't need to. The truth was out. And the war, finally, was turning. The hearing room at the Capitol was colder than it looked on TV. Ray sat stiff-backed in the 3rd row, wearing a jacket he hadn't touched in years. Civilian, but pressed. The same couldn't be said for his hands. They trembled slightly, not from fear, just the weight of it all. Sitting beside him, Max rested quietly, head on his paws, tail still, watching. Ahead, at the long table beneath the seal of the Armed Services Committee, Keller sat in a tailored grey suit, polished and smiling like a man who'd already won. Ray had seen that smile before, back in Afghanistan, when Keller was barking orders from behind the wire while others bled in the dirt. Only this time, the dirt had names. Tags, flash drives, and one German shepherd who'd come back from the dead. The chairwoman tapped her mic. "Colonel Richard Keller, we've reviewed the records. We've seen the logs recovered by Agent Salter and corroborated by Blake Lanning's sworn affidavit. Your company denies involvement in unauthorized experimentation on military working dogs. Would you care to respond?" Keller leaned in smoothly. "Madam Chair, what's being presented here today is fiction, fabricated by bitter men with vendettas. Project Valkyrie never existed. We retired all canines per proper protocol." Ray stood. Not because he was told to, because Max moved first. Just a shift of his shoulders, barely perceptible, but Ray felt it. He walked to the center of the chamber. The guards tensed, but the chairwoman raised her hand. "I served with Max," Ray said clearly. His designation was MWD Max 11372A USAF. I was his handler in Kunduz. He was declared dead 10 years ago. A murmur rippled across the room. Ray looked toward Keller. "This is him." Keller laughed softly. "With all due respect, Mr. Donovan, that's a nice-looking dog, but he was burned, scarred, dumped in the desert outside of an unauthorized compound funded by your subcontractors. You don't have proof of that." Ray opened the duffel bag and placed the flash drive on the table. Then, gently, he removed Max's collar. Etched inside, nearly worn to nothing, was the original plate. Max 11372A. "I don't need to prove it to you," Ray said. He already did. He walked through hell and came home. Max stood beside him now, head up, tail low. He didn't bark, didn't bare his teeth, just stood. Still, proud. Someone in the room whispered, "That's him." Then came the twist. A woman from the second row rose, someone Ray hadn't noticed until now. Early 40s, navy blazer, clipboard hugged close to her chest. "I was the vet tech at Langley when Max was checked, in post-Kunduz," she said. "He was alive, barely, and Keller signed off on a mercy euthanasia request that was never carried out, because I hid him." Gasps. Keller's composure cracked. For a fraction of a second his mask slipped. Jaw clenched, eye twitched. The chairwoman banged her gavel. "Colonel Keller, you are now under federal investigation for gross misconduct, falsification of military records, and abuse of government resources." Ray turned to Max, kneeling beside him. The dog leaned into him, just slightly, the way he used to when missions went south, but they made it out breathing. "You did that," Ray whispered. "You brought it all back." As the guards escorted Keller out, Max didn't move, but his eyes tracked the man, and for the first time, Ray saw something new there. Not rage, closure. Outside, reporters swarmed, but Ray kept his head down. Max walked by his side like a shadow returned. Salter caught up to them in the parking lot. "You good?" Ray didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "He's the hero. I just followed him." Salter smiled. "He led us home." And Max? He kept walking. Not toward the cameras, not toward the crowd, but forward, where the truth lived, finally unburied. The auditorium was packed, not with soldiers, not with lawmakers, but with civilians, families, veterans, students, and media crews tangled in cables and lights. The glossy stage floor reflected the logo of the night's event, Valor in Silence, a tribute to K-9 heroes. Ray stood behind the curtain, adjusting the knot of a tie he didn't want to wear. The program director had begged him to participate. Just a short walk on stage. A few words about Max. Maybe a handshake. They promised it wasn't for show, but it all still felt staged. Next to him, Max sat calmly, his service vest fitted over the faded scars. He wasn't the same dog who had collapsed at the war memorial. He had weight back on his frame. His coat, though patchy, looked healthier. His gait, though uneven, was steady. But his eyes, those were unchanged, sharp, focused, ancient. "You sure you're ready for this?" Ray asked under his breath. Max tilted his head slightly, that familiar move, the one that had survived fire and loss and time. Before Ray could say more, the host's voice echoed through the auditorium. "Tonight, we welcome a hero whose story you may have seen on the news, but no news clip, no article can truly convey the bond forged in war, lost in chaos, and rediscovered against all odds. Please welcome Sergeant Ray Donovan and Max." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Ray took a breath and walked forward. Max followed at his side, not because of a leash, there wasn't one, but because he chose to. They stepped into the light together. Ray didn't speak right away. He let the room breathe, let them take in the dog, the limp, the scars, the calm strength. I was 24 when I met Max. Ray began. We were deployed to Kunduz province. He wasn't my first K-9 partner, but he became my last. Not because he failed, but because he never did. The room stilled. I thought he died in an explosion. I held him in my arms, bleeding. I carried him through smoke and screaming and fire. I buried that part of myself the day they told me he didn't make it. He paused, voice tightening. 10 years later, he walked into my life again. Burned, broken, but breathing. Whispers rippled through the crowd. He found me, not the other way around. Ray looked down. Max was still, steady. This dog uncovered a buried military program. He exposed a system that treated its most loyal soldiers like tools. He helped put a powerful man behind bars, and he never once asked for anything in return. A beat. He's not a survivor. He's a soldier. He came home. The crowd rose to their feet. Cameras snapped. Someone sobbed in the front row. But Max didn't flinch. He stood beside Ray like he always had, quiet, unmoved, watchful. They stepped off stage together. Backstage, the atmosphere turned casual again. People shook Ray's hand. Some tried to touch Max, but Ray waved them off. Max wasn't a photo op. He was still working. Always working. A handler from another K-9 unit approached, eyes wide. That dog, he tracked explosives earlier today, didn't he? Ray stiffened. What do you mean? The man fumbled with his phone. I saw the report, near the train station. Civilian noticed a guy dumping a bag. Police didn't spot anything, but a dog signaled. They said it matched the description of yours. Ray's gut turned. We weren't near the train station. The man blinked. You weren't? No. Ray turned sharply, crouching next to Max. You did something, he said softly. While I was in rehearsal? Max didn't move, but his ears pricked, alert. Ray stood and grabbed his jacket. He moved past the crew, ignored the questions. Back outside, the air had changed. A wind had picked up, the kind that smelled like something was coming. Back in the truck, Ray checked the GPS. A recent location ping. Unfamiliar. West end of town. Max had been there. Not alone. Ray drove fast, tires hissing over pavement. When he reached the spot, he saw it. A small park, mostly empty now. At the far edge, police tape flapped against a fence. An officer stood talking into his radio. Ray flashed his ID, the one Salter had arranged for him. What happened here? The officer didn't look surprised. Bomb threat, something in the trash can, but someone beat us to it. Ray frowned. What do you mean? There was a guy here. Said he saw a German Shepherd alert. No handler, just the dog. Then it took off. Disappeared. Ray looked down at Max, who had jumped from the truck before the engine shut off. He was sniffing the grass, ears up. A moment later, he sat beside the base of the tree. Quiet. Still. That was his sign. Ray knelt beside him. You were here. Max didn't move. You came on your own. You warned someone. The officer raised an eyebrow. You saying your dog came out here without you? Ray stood. He's not mine. Not really. He looked at Max, chest heavy with something he hadn't named until now. He's more than a partner. He's the mission. They returned to the apartment late that night. Ray didn't sleep. Max stood at the window again, eyes fixed on something far away. When the phone rang, Ray already knew who it would be. Salter. Turn on the news. Ray did. Keller, handcuffed, walking through the lobby of his own company headquarters, surrounded by federal agents, faces pale, cameras ruthless. Charges scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Wire fraud, abuse of classified assets, criminal neglect. But what made Ray stop breathing? A woman's voice off camera. "Why are you smiling, Colonel?" Keller's mouth curled into a grin, and he said, "Because the dog doesn't know what's coming next." The screen cut to static. Ray looked at Max. Max didn't growl, he didn't whimper, but he turned from the window and moved to the door. Ready? Again. The snow started falling just after dawn. Ray stood on the ridge above the cabin, jacket zipped to the throat, boots rooted in hard ground. Below, the trail was barely visible now, just faint depressions where paw prints had pushed into the frost. Behind him, the wind hummed low, carrying that quiet kind of tension that always came before something big. Max was already at the edge of the tree line. Still, ears high, his nose lifted toward the air like it was asking permission to keep going. They had been tracking Keller's last play for 3 days. After the televised arrest, Keller had disappeared from holding. Transfer van hijacked. 2 guards unconscious. Someone on the inside. Maybe more than one. Salter had gone silent. All they had was a single ping. A remote GPS bounce from a burner phone linked to Keller's inner circle. It pointed to a location deep in the mountains, an old ranger station no longer listed on government maps. A ghost zone. Ray didn't need an op plan. He had Max. They moved as one. No words, just motion, intention, memory. Halfway up the trail, Max stopped again. Saturday. Ray crouched beside him, pressing a hand to the frozen dirt. A faint vibration. Subtle, but familiar. Generator. Someone was here. They moved slowly now, cutting through the thickest brush, circled the perimeter. The old cabin had been reinforced. Military tarp over busted windows, antennae strapped to a solar rig. And 2 guards, armed, pacing the front. Max kept his body low, nose twitching. Then he turned sharply, locking eyes with Ray. Ray read it instantly. There was someone else. Inside. They waited for the right beat. Max moved first. He crept around the west side, drawing the attention of the guards with a single, precise rustle. The kind that sounded just loud, enough to be a mistake. One guard stepped forward. Ray didn't let him take a second. He dropped him with a clean takedown, quiet, fast. The second turned, but Max was already on him, hitting high, a full-body shove that took the man into the snow. Ray rushed to secure both while Max stood watch, his chest rising slow and measured. They breached the door in tandem. Inside, the room was stripped down. Makeshift cot. Table covered in hard drives and cables. Battery packs lined the wall. A laptop sat open, blinking with coordinates. The kind used to remotely activate something bigger. And then there he was. Keller. Unshaven. Pale. Holding a remote in one hand, a pistol in the other. Ray didn't speak. Keller did. "You think this ends with me in cuffs?" He hissed. "You think I didn't plan for this?" Ray raised his sidearm. "Drop it." Keller's hand tightened on the remote. "You pull that trigger, the signal goes out anyway. You'll be lighting the match for me." Max stepped forward. Slowly. Calmly. Ray's voice stayed steady. "You don't scare him anymore." Keller sneered. "He's just a dog." Max kept walking. Keller flinched, lifting the pistol slightly toward Max. That was the mistake. Ray fired. The gun dropped. The remote skidded across the floor. Max pounced, not to attack, but to guard. He planted himself between Ray and Keller, unmoving. Alert. Alive. The backup team arrived 10 minutes later. Salter was with them, bleeding from a cut over his brow, but standing. "I'm guessing you didn't wait," he said, pulling off his gloves. Ray didn't answer, just looked at Max. Salter smiled. He's getting good at this. Ray knelt down, running a hand down Max's neck. He never stopped being good. We just forgot how to listen. The rest was paperwork and cleanup. By sunset, the cabin was cordoned off. Keller was in custody again. This time, under federal watch. No transport vans, no middlemen. Ray and Max drove back in silence. The sun bled out across the mountain range, turning the snow into a wash of gold and shadow. They didn't go straight home. Ray turned the truck toward the memorial park, the same one where Max had collapsed weeks ago. No one was there. He stepped out. Max followed. They walked to the center, where the stone wall listed names of fallen soldiers, both two-legged and four. Ray pulled something from his pocket. A new plate, clean, freshly engraved. He knelt and placed it beneath the others, pressing it into the snow. Max MWD 11372A returned with honor. Max sat beside him, quietly, like he knew. Ray exhaled, a deep breath that had been waiting for years. "You're home?" he said. No applause, no speeches, just the wind. Max leaned into his side. Later, as they walked back to the truck, a kid and his father passed by. The boy looked up, wide-eyed. "Is that your dog?" Ray paused. He looked down at Max, then back at the boy. "No," he said softly. "He's everyone's." They drove home in darkness, a good darkness, the kind that came after the fight, when there was nothing left to chase. And yet Ray knew something had changed. Max wasn't done. Not yet. Because for every name carved into stone, there were a dozen more unspoken. And sometimes the ones who come back are the ones who never left. What's your story with a loyal dog? If this journey moved you, share your story. Support our mission and follow the Channel German Shepherd, where the bond between human and dog is more than just a tale. It's a truth.